Greetings, folks. Your cartoonist pal Stan here, back for another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon. It's a show where I'm celebrating the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons, which I've been playing for most of those 50 years, and I've had the good luck to be working on it a lot of the time. Not nearly the 50 years, but, a good portion of it. I worked at TSR, I worked at Wizards of the Coast, I've been a freelancer, and I'm still loving it. Just like hopefully anyone who's tuning in here is. And as anyone who's watched a previous episode knows, I have guests to talk to. One of the good things about having a career in this industry is I've made a lot of friends with some very, very interesting people. And I'm glad to be able to have some chats with my friends that would interest you. Tonight, our guest is Skip Williams, who has been many, many things over many, many editions of the game, and I think we're going to have some good conversation. He goes back to, he's an original Lake Geneva boy. He goes back to having played with Gary in the early days, and has worked on at least 4 different editions of the game. And I don't know that he knows where a lot of skeletons are buried, but he certainly has a lot of interesting tales. While we're having the conversation, as always, I'm going to be doing a cartoon homage to a piece of art, piece of classic D&D art. I'm going year by year. I started with 1974. This year's 1979, which is the year that the original Dungeon Master's Guide came out. And I am going to be doing a sketch of the cover of the original Dungeon Master's Guide. That'll be going on while Skip and I have our conversation. And when all is said and done, I'll present it for you all to see. In fact, before we go and bring Skip on, I will show you what the finished version of last week's drawing, which was the my interpretation of the drawing of A Paladin in Hell, which was an interior drawing in the original Player's Handbook. As usual, I got most of the line drawing done last week, but the coloring all got done off stage. This is what it wound up looking like. You would have found that out sooner if you had been a subscriber to our newsletter, our free newsletter, which you can get at 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com. And anyone who joins as a free subscriber gets the art sent to you as soon as it's done, usually by Thursday or Friday. It'll show up in your inbox, and you get all other kinds of insights. There are also paid levels, which get you some other things, but I don't push that. I probably should. It'd be a good idea if I did, but I just come on at the free level, see what's going on. One of the other things being at a free level allows you to do is I'm making art prints of all of these drawings. They're going to be signed prints, and the only way to get them, the only way to order them, is to be a subscriber to the free newsletter. Now, of course, if you're a paid subscriber, again, you don't have to be, but if you are, you get a discount on the cost. But free subscriber, and you can find the ones you like and order them. Isn't that fun? I think so. Anyway, so let me come back here, and I think that's enough rambling about me. Let us bring on our guest, Skip Williams. Hey, Skip, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Stan.
So, always a pleasure. It's good to see you. You are still living out in the wilds of Wisconsin, though you'd been out here in Seattle for a number of years, but when you left the company, you went back out to Wisconsin, correct?
That's correct.
And that is where you're from originally, right?
Right. Originally from Lake Geneva, also the home of the D&D game, but we're considerably farther west these days. But where we escaped from Seattle.
Before we get into deeper questions, why don't I just let you, for the young folk who are tuning in who may not know who this Skip Williams guy. Who is this Skip Williams guy?
Who is this Skip Williams guy? Well, the reason we're probably interested here is because I was playing the game very early, and eventually, while I was still in high school, was working at TSR, one of the couple of brats that were hanging around. Ernie Gygax being the other major one. So there were all these young men, fairly young men, working on the game. Alan Hammock and Gary and Brian were actually fairly young at the time, and Mike Carr and gosh, and then any number of other people, and then there were the kids, the brats, Ernie and me mostly. So I was working part time while I was still in high school, uh, emptying the trash and mowing the lawn and operating the cash register in the hobby shop and packing
Hmm.
boxes, doing that sort of thing. And then I went off to college and got interested in writing and thought about what I was going to do about being a writer, and then understood. And then finally, a 2 watt light bulb went off, and I realized that I sort of had it in with a publisher.
Yeah. So you were so then you joined TSR, and how many years? So you were there through the early years and moved out, as I said before, when the company got bought. You moved out to Seattle area. How long was your tenure with TSR and Wizards?
Yeah, well, TSR actually actually laid me off. I went back and I was working with a fellow named Joe Orlowski, who was a graduate of UW Parkside and then the current location for Gen Con for a number of years. So my first real, honest to goodness, full time job with TSR was running Gen Con.
Hmm.
I did that for a while until the company had its first implosion, and then I was laid off, and then came back as a freelancer and was rehired. So, and then the company imploded again, and the coast bought us out, and then I went to Seattle. So my first paycheck from TSR would have been dated like the spring of 1975. So like March of 75.
Okay, that's
We
pretty
first,
early.
yeah, that's a while. Yeah.
So we got Dale Donovan and Kevin Melka and Jeff Grubb and Kerry are in the chat room, all saying hi. Hi guys, thank you for joining us. All right, so I'm going to change the screen up here and get my drawing going. But let's start with that. So you grew up in Lake Geneva, and how is it? Did you know Ernie from school? Is that
Yeah, I actually my first meeting with Ernie would have been in 1965 when we were
okay?
both kindergartners. And I remember one day we had a short debate over Superman versus Mighty Mouse.
A
And
classic.
Ernie insisted that Mighty was better than Super. And I left it there, which is probably the first time in my life that I ever did the right thing for the wrong reason. Because, it does not pay to argue about things like that. But I didn't let him go. I mean, he was just seemed so sure that I had to let him go. That was not probably exactly, like I say, it was the right thing to do, which is don't have a pointless argument, but not necessarily for the right reason.
So
So yeah,
all right, so you didn't let Mighty Mouse and Superman ruin what wound up to be a good career.
Yeah,
Pro-
something like that.
Probably
I
didn't
just
know it at the time,
didn't.
but it worked out.
It worked out. Yeah.
So, how is it that you got into playing the game?
So playing the game is a little bit more complicated. Um, Gen Con was running at the time, and I didn't even know about it.
Now, this is Gen
So, but
Con when it was in Lake Geneva.
in Lake Geneva at the Horticultural Hall. So this would have been Gen Con 5 or 6. But there was a it made the front page of the local paper, the regional news, and there was this black and white picture on the front page of a bunch of people playing what turned out to be an HO scale World War II armor game. And I remember looking at that and going, that's pretty interesting. And about that time, I was in junior high. That would be middle school to people who are not as ancient as us. And a high school classmate of mine was, first of all, talking about this set of books that was coming out, and also had a map of a country he was running in a World War II campaign. And we
Okay.
talked a little bit about what he was doing. That particular person was Don Art,
Okay.
who was a local gamer and lent his name to a famous artifact, the Invulnerable Coat of Arn. Because apparently, when he was playing with Gary, he was scared, just scared to death of ever taking damage.
I play with people who are like that today.
Yeah, there's takes all kinds, and some kinds just keep coming back. Yeah, so yeah, the original uh, description of that actually refers to the cleric to Don of Arn. So yeah, so that gave me. I was then that made me aware of the local gaming community, and then when I got into high school the next year, D&D was new, and a different classmate said, "I've got this thing. Let's play it."
And did you know that it was Ernie's dad that was involved?
Um, Not initially, no.
So I find that fascinating that you knew him, you knew the family somewhat, and you got involved, and you're in the same town, but you got involved, and they weren't involved at all in your initial start.
That's correct. The other student is somebody I'd known from not quite as long as Ernie, um, but I'd known him since about the fourth grade or so. So we started playing D&D one on one, as is often the case.
Right? Yeah.
And Ernie got back in the picture because he had a copy of Warriors of Mars, which was the third or fourth product from TSR. And he said, "Do you play games other than D&D?" And I said, "I'll try anything." So then we started playing Warriors of Mars more or less one on one.
um, so you became like a well-rounded, all-purpose kind of gamer.
Yes, I suppose so. I played 2 different role playing games, considering that there were only about 2 role playing games on the market at the time.
Right?
That's all of it. Yeah,
But
because that
you
was
know,
that was before Traveler or even before On Guard, actually. So
no one ever. We all say we don't want to get asked this, but I'm going to ask you. What? Tell me about your character. Do you remember anything particularly good about your early characters?
well, my early D&D characters kept dying
Yeah, that's familiar.
until I got a character, and for some reason and the game club Oregon advisor had a campaign that he ran about every other week.
Mm.
So I was a fighter who actually had a pretty high dexterity, and he actually lived. His name was, I don't remember even what his name was. Boric. I want to say his name was Boric, but that was my Greyhawk character, so that wasn't. I don't know what his. I can't remember that. And I think the characters that before then that had played in other campaigns, I don't think they lived long enough to be named.
That sounds familiar too.
Yeah, I had this really high dexterity fighter in in the school campaign, and he had a fairly long career. And a couple of characters in Gary's games, including the most famous one being Rufus of Hamlet, who was also a fighter.
So what? Everyone always wants to know what it was like playing at Gary's table. What are your lasting takeaways from that? Or it?
Yeah, so Gary was pretty tactical and um, was very much exploration and treasure hunting. Not a whole lot on role playing or character development.
Right.
So generally, his Gary's games were quests for whatever big treasure we'd heard about. In the early versions of the game, you could find in your random treasures, you could find maps to other treasures.
Right.
So there was a whole lot of that going on. And then occasionally Gary would have something like the land beyond the magic mirror, for example, where you could get sidetracked out of the major dungeon and go off into some alternate reality. In fact, you could, if you went deep enough in the dungeon, you actually came out in China.
All right. I did not know that.
Yeah, and somebody did. Somebody we did. A group did that once and decided to walk back. So there was literally a world spanning adventure at one time. We learned later that when we were going through the Indian era that if we had zigged instead of zagged, we would have found Nirvana. That if that would have been the case, then nobody would have ever wanted to leave, and we would have restarted the campaign. This was before the Great Wheel Great Wheel cosmology.
Right.
So Nirvana would just have been a version of heaven.
All right. So then you were saying then you went away to college, or I guess you must have been doing some work for them before you went to college.
Yes.
Was that the mowing the lawn and running the cash register phase?
Mowing the lawn and running the cash register, and Gary pulled me in to help him finish the monster and treasure assortment. I don't know if you remember those.
Yeah.
You remember them at all?
I remember.
So he said, "This is what I want. Start generating random treasures and random monsters." So that was actually my first design work, as it were. It was more like a co-design piece. So I did that.
Where did you go to school?
UW Whitewater, same place that Jim Ward went.
And what did you major in?
English.
Creative or literature?
Actually, there actually was a writer. There was a writer curriculum. that was new. I had a I had a very good professor, Jim Beck, who was supplementing his income by mostly by writing articles about sailing.
Okay.
He was really good at just laying out the basics. Here's how you write something about anything and things of that nature. So they started a writing emphasis curriculum. I said, okay, well, I'll do that.
All right, and then out you came, and you realized after a bit that this knowing this Gygax fella might be helpful.
Yes, that's pretty much it.
Um, and somehow that led to you being in charge of Gen Con.
That's how it worked out. And yeah, and the English background in English was actually pretty darn important at the time because Gen Con was everything was done with paper and pencil or with paper and typewriter.
Right.
So doing things like putting together the convention program and trying to turn everybody's chicken scratchings from event submissions into entries in the event catalog and understanding something about typesetting and et cetera, all pretty useful.
That I mean, interestingly, that's similar to I got in at West End as a graphic designer because through my work in as an English student, I'd learned enough to be able to put together a newsletter while I was teaching in Japan. I had a newsletter that I did all of the layout and just what you're describing, right? Turn everyone's handwritten articles into typeset articles and present something that went out and looked like a finished product. And so they said, you know what, you're all set to be a graphic designer. And I said, is there a check in it? Next thing you know, I'm a professional.
There you go. Na-na-na-na.
All right. So
3 weeks
when
ago, I did not a spell engineer. Yeah. Now I are one.
yeah, so when was it that you were in charge of Gen Con? As well, was it Parkside or
Yeah, so that would have been 81, 82, 83. Yeah, this sounds about right. I was actually doing a convention every 3 months.
really?
Gen Con was the big one in August.
Yeah.
But I also did one Winter Fantasy right at the turn of the year and Autumn Revel a little bit before Halloween and Spring Revel a little bit, after Easter. So roughly a convention every 3 months.
That that sounds like a
Three
terrible.
very small ones and one big one.
I'll be honest. That sounds like a terrible job to me.
It was in retrospect, it was really a terrible job. It was a job that didn't garner me a whole lot of respect, and there was a lot of stress. And
So when you look at it, the thing that pops in my head right now is when you look at that, it's being one of the early people that ran Gen Con and Gen Con having become the icon that it is. Are there parts of Gen Con that you still look at and think, yeah, that's there because I started it. That's my thing, and no one knows it.
well, I mean, in terms of Gen Con having become essentially a media show, I guess I mean, I was always looking for things that people could do besides game because once Gen Con got out of Lake Geneva, there were never enough games to go around. And that still remains the case today.
Right.
I mean, if you hang out on Gen Con social media, that's their biggest gripe is nobody can get into a game. You know, I did little things like for the first time, like event tickets.
Uh huh.
That was, Gen Con had never had event tickets before then. But that's pretty basic. The auction is still there. I mean, and that's still that basic format. You know, here, get rid of your stuff and actually get a check that you might be able to go home on if you can get somebody to cash it for you.
Right.
That was part of it, and that was something I actually had to fight to keep.
Really, the people.
We're not making money. We're not making any money on this auction thing. And I said, well, the idea is not to make money on the auction. The idea is to have programming at the con that people like, and other than the AD&D Open, that's it is our most successful piece of programming, other than the AD&D Open that we have, because we fill a room with 100 people and it goes all day every day.
Right.
So
Well, that I mean that's
there's a
pretty.
whole lot of that happening at the time. Well, this isn't worth our money. Well, okay, sure
Yeah.
it is, because there aren't tangible benefits. No, the con, if you take a look at everything and consider, the depreciation on the cost for the TV ads that we're running and things like that, yeah, it all pretty well adds up, and the number, it's on the red side of the ledger. We put more money into Gen Con than we pull out, but we're not doing this for the money. We're doing this, to promote the business. So, how much are you putting in? How much is our account with Walden Books worth?
Just a
So,
little bit.
but
So, how did you then get the switch from being the Gen Con guy to uh, writing?
um, well, the RPGA was also new at that time and always needed something written, because they had a newsletter and they had needed people to write tournaments. And then there was also that big proliferation of lines that the company had,
Right.
because you had D&D at the and you had AD&D at the time, and you had um, the World lines coming out. So there were more projects than there were staff slots. So the company needed freelancers at that time just to get the product generated.
Right.
And freelance editors, as well as not just freelance writers, but freelance editors as well. So I was doing freelance editing of tournaments and polyhedron newsing and some freelance design of adventures.
Um, and eventually that turned into
He's
writing.
committed to the ink, folks.
Hmm.
I'm just making a comment on your sketch. You're committing to, he's actually starting to ink.
Yeah. That's
The
it's
crowd goes wild.
no. There's no time for delayed here. We're putting on a show, just like Gen Con. We're putting on a show. Keep the
The show.
peoples entertained. Uh, so it started as it often does with freelancing, and then when did your responsibilities stop being Gen Con and start being
Well,
just?
that was when they told me, clean out your desk and leave. That's when I stopped being
Oh,
Gen Con.
oh,
So I was on my own for a couple of years, about the time that Gary went to California there. So,
oh. Okay. And then when did you come back? When did they bring you back inside the fold?
well, I mean, I started freelancing almost immediately after that. Not,
Hmm.
not. absolutely immediately after that, but very shortly after that. And then the RPGA had me on as a temp for a while. So 86 or 87, I guess, is when I came back after leaving at the end of 83. So I think that's about right.
All right. Um, and so you were doing polyhedron and uh, running the RPGA, or assisting. Was Gene doing the RPGA at
So
that point?
Gene Raby was actually in charge. I was the
Yeah.
chief washer.
Which is a good position too. But what was going on at the RPGA? And you know what? A lot of people these days don't know what the RPGA is. I mean, the RPGA has been gone long enough that we've got generations so that has been without it. Why don't you explain for those poor souls what the RPGA was?
So the RPGA started out as sort of a brainstorm from Gary. He announced at one time that, okay, we need role playing needs something like the old International Federation of Wargaming, which was the organization that helped get Gen Con off the ground. So we need this organization of role players that's communicating with each other and doing things together the way that miniatures gamers and board gamers used to do back in the day. And then
Okay.
they brought in Frank Menser to run it initially, and he got the newsletter up and running and the tournament program up and running. And then Frank left to follow Gary to New Infinities, and Gene wound up with a job after a few fits and starts.
So what were you? What was it producing? It was producing the newsletter and
Initially bi-monthly,
mm,
and lots and lots and lots of tournaments
all right.
because
So
the RPGA essentially became the convention support arm of the company.
so here's. I mean, this is
So
another interesting bit that again I think that younger, particularly younger uh, people who are newer to the game won't will hear tournament and not really understand what that means because when we think tournament these days, it's it's Magic tournaments, right? I don't think there are a lot of RPG centric things that are called tournaments anymore.
no, there really aren't. I mean, because Adventurers League is about as close as it comes, and Adventurers League is much closer to the RPGA's living campaigns than sort of the main line of things. So Frank essentially found a way to play role playing games competitively, and it actually took off because everybody would play a completely pre-generated character that had a fully developed background and guidelines for interacting with all the other characters, plus the scenario.
So
So you
each.
were
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
you sat down to play. You were handed a character with a background and your thoughts on your companions, and typically that was a table of 6. So you get your stats, and you get generally a full page typewritten of what your character was all about, and then another page of what your character thought about everybody else. And then you'd
Okay.
play for 4 to 6 hours, generally just 4 hours, and then everybody would vote on who did it best. So you could actually be eliminated. There were rounds that were tournament biggest ones were 3 rounds. And there would be a final round played like on Saturday night or Sunday afternoon in a 4-day convention. And so
So
you could win a D&D tournament.
which again I is so so different than most people are uh, can even conceive of when they think of role playing. These
Yeah, it it worked remarkably well, considering that it really wasn't a very good fit for what D&D is.
right, and I mean, it strikes me that this comes out of the fact that we had this conversation. I had this conversation with uh, Jeff Grubb and Steve Winter, and again with Steve Sullivan about so many of the decisions are based out of the fact that D&D grew out of miniatures gaming, something that was a head-to-head and competitive thing, and were a lot of things that entered the game. I think because that's that was the starting point, and so it was a strong follow through into it, and things that don't seem to make much sense begin to come together when you realize that minis and competitive gaming was the start of this.
I mean, certainly it explains the emphasis on combat.
Um, all right, so what what else? So what else was going on? You how when did you start to be the sage in Dragon Magazine?
I started to be the sage also when I was still being a freelancer. Um, and that was simply because the company didn't know what to do with all the questions it was getting.
Right.
There was literally a 4 drawer file cabinet full of letters that had not been answered.
And so
So
again,
I,
sorry, just to pause before you give the answer that I want to hear. Again, for the folks that are new to all this sage advice column that is still going on as an online thing started back in as a column in Dragon Magazine, and you were the original sage.
that's not exactly true. The sage advice actually was actually handled by a series of guests initially.
Okay.
Um, I don't remember if Cass started it or if Tim Cass started that, or one of the editors of Dragon Magazine went out and recruited people to say, "Here, please take a handful of letters and write me a two to 3 pages in the magazine, question and answers."
Right. Okay. So you were one of
So
the sage.
yeah, so Gene Wells did it a couple of times, and Will Niebling did it a couple of times. I don't even remember how many different people there were doing sage advice, but it was Roger Moore who said we just need a regular column. So
Right. All right. So
that
then.
was there. So yeah, I was essentially turned loose. Uh, was paid by the letter to answer people's questions, and I had the foresight to keep track of all of my answers on my Apple IIe. 8-bit power there for you. So I created a little index. This is actually before database programming, or at least I didn't have a database program for it. So I would was actually recording on index cards and then translating that into a Word doc, into a text document. It was using a program called Apple Writer.
Wow.
The old, I don't know if you remember Apple Writer or not. So
Yeah.
that was even older than Apple Works.
um,
So yeah, I did a printout of that and handed it to Roger Moore and said, "Well, here's all the topics for which I have an answer already.
Okay.
So initially it was, okay, well, give me give me a column that deals with these topics.
Right. And not to skip ahead a bit, but how long did you go on and do the Sage column?
Years and years. I don't clearly even remember when I quit. I quit at the advent of fourth edition. It, when fourth edition was coming around, and they said we don't want you to do this anymore.
So that's going to be at least approaching 2010. That's a long time to be so smart.
So, so 18, so that would have been so 86 or 87. So yeah, that's a while.
Yeah, that's 20 plus years.
Huh.
And it's
And a
I
couple of editions of the game too.
yeah, yeah. I'd say
Because that was
I of course, and as I said in my intro, right, one of the cool things for me doing the show is I get to chat with the very smart people that I know, and I know how smart they are. But even through this, I come out with the number of things that you were involved with just glanced over me throughout all the years. You know, you were the sage for 20 plus years. You started the Gen Con, or you may not have started it, but you were responsible for growing and saving the Gen Con auction. And this we haven't even gotten to any of the game design proper that went on later in your career. By the time we got out here, and we're going to skip over a bunch of years again for the interest of not going on until midnight. We got out to Seattle and we started working on third edition. You already having been the sage in first and second edition, you were one of the core designers for the redesign for third edition. And that probably is where I think the vast majority of uh, current day newer fans will have picked up your name, as you had the main design line on the uh, DMG for third edition.
actually it's the Monster Manual.
Oh, yo, you're right. No, Monty had the DMG. Sorry, uh,
Jonathan
but yeah,
Sweet
no.
with
So, uh, tell us a little bit about that being involved in that segue from second to third edition, or just some of your thoughts, memories of that time. If unless they're unspeakable, in which case we'll move on to something else.
well, I don't know that they're unspeakable. I mean the open secret is that third edition was underway at TSR and had been for some time.
Right.
And then just talking about it, Steve Winter was the creative director for the core D&D rules at the time, and he was telling people we've got to be thinking about a new edition. Says our current edition is getting rather long in the tooth.
Right.
And so there was a whole lot of discussion about what to do. And then there was also the player's option books as well, looking at different ways to parse common stuff, the combat and tactics. And I can't remember what the other two books were. There were two other books.
At least.
Um, yeah, just looking at different ways to do classic D&D things without doing a whole lot of damage to the system. So that had all been ongoing when the acquisition happened. So there was a whole lot of that. Peter Atkins and we're getting us together and saying we should we should do this, this, and this, or we need to address this problem. It's like, okay, well, we've been talking about that for about a year now. He would say, oh,
And then what? Why don't we just make a book out of it?
yeah, something like that. Well, I mean, there's a lot of back and forth about what the thing should contain and things that real fans didn't care for about second edition. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
Oh, you should never have dropped the monk, and you should never have dropped the assassin. And it's like, okay, well, we can put those back in.
I remember at the time in house, the third edition team, you and Monty and Jonathan and Peter and some other folks spent a lot of time doing uh, blue sky brainstorming and thinking about things. And then I remember very clearly when uh, it was brought to the staff as a whole as a pitch, kind of like a pitch, but kind of more of a, here's where we're thinking about going. This is your chance to give feedback. And we certainly got a wide range of responses, and as wide as you get from the audience writ large. Right? There were people who were totally into it, and people who didn't think that you should change any. All these changes are bad. What for your sake, from your position, uh, what was the I don't know what was it that you thought the mission should be for this third edition project?
Somewhere on on a thumb drive or the equivalent of a thumb drive, it's probably actually on a 3.5-inch disc and lost, and therefore lost. There was a memo I wrote
Yeah.
that said, okay, these are all the things that we've done, picking up a little bit on some of the things that Steve had said. Steve's comment when we were still at TSR was, we've grown the game beyond its natural borders with all of our splat books, and we need to do something to turn it back into a coherent whole again. And I sort of picked up on that. I said, okay, there are things that we're doing that are mostly wrong. There are things that we were doing that are completely wrong, and there are things that we're doing that we need to keep doing, because we have the market leader, and we don't. The most foolish thing we can do is try to make the game like the products we're beating in the marketplace.
Right. Don't
But
don't make the new Coke error.
well, yeah, it's just yeah. Well, right. That's yeah. The term "new Coke" gets, I think, trotted out every time there's a new edition of the game, but still, yeah, yeah. Coke didn't need to make Coke like Pepsi. They needed to
Right.
keep it. Um, so yeah, and I identified things like the skill system. I said, okay, we've got this thing, we call it non-weapon proficiencies, but what the game really needs is something that to govern everything that you do that isn't in your class description.
Right.
You keep classes because that's D&D. So we're going to have fighters, we're going to have magic users, we're going to have rogues, we're going to have clerics. We need those because D&D is a class-based system. But a character who lives in a fantasy world can do more different things than you get out of your class. So we need to be able to cover all of that, whether it's lighting fires or making pots or whatever it is. And the other thing we need to do is we need to get rid of We need to get rid of this regression to zero that we have. We've got to. We already know Bruce Nesmith. Did a version of what was it, Gamma World, where he just flipped everything over
Right.
and ran the numbers and ran armor class numbers and saving throw numbers up from zero rather than starting them at 20 and going back. So if we want to continue to want people to play games for 20 years, we need to make the game scalable so that you're not trying to roll a -10 on your D20. And the arithmetic is all there. All we have to do is change it. And a couple of other things like that. Just things that we need to do that'll carry the game into the 21st century, because we were still in the 20th century at the time. So
Right. Yeah, it's hard as it is to remember.
yes, sir. At the
uh,
turn of the century.
Man, the fact that turn of the century is now in my vocabulary in a non-ironic way
Yes, that's
is
something
among the
else.
things that makes me feel the oldest.
Yes, indeed.
So, I mean, I don't want to get in.
1900s.
Hmm.
The
Yeah,
1900s. Yeah.
back in the 1900s. Um, I certainly don't want to get into a who was better, TSR or Wizards discussion, but I would be interested to ask you what you think some of the biggest differences in uh, the way D&D as a game was treated by the different companies. What the focuses were, or I don't know how what writing was like, what the process was, whatever comes to your mind. Uh, or if nothing does, we'll move along and look at something else.
Well, it's a little bit ironic because I think TSR was very much, we're just going to keep doing things the way we've always done them, and that our current audience is comfortable with. And, we're not going to worry a whole lot about the logic here. We're just going to keep doing it the way we've always done it. Which Watsy promptly dismissed as hand waving, and hand waving was a bad thing.
Right.
Watsy was coming at the design for D&D in the same sense way that they were designing Magic the Gathering, where things are largely cut and dried.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Magic definitely is a game where the game is maybe not secondary, but it's is the math is as important as anything else, and that
Well,
wasn't
yeah,
always the
and
case with
also,
D&D.
yeah, and also, yeah, finding combinations
Yeah.
that give you, well, ultimately give you the win.
Right. Right. Um, but I mean, the thing about for me about I don't know if it's a saving grace, but one of the things that made it interesting is that uh, when Wizards bought it, when Peter Atkinson led the effort for Wizards to buy it, was because Peter was a big fan of D&D, and it had been a while at that point since the people running the company were fans of the game.
That's true.
Um,
And Peter was not a fan of second edition. I made that very clear.
Well, thereby the fourth, third edition got made. Yeah, but he did love D&D, right? That's I know from having talked to him personally, and just from all of his public statements, right? That's
Well, yeah, the name Wizards of the Coast that comes from his D&D campaign.
right. Um, and yet, Wizards definitely was a company more and more over the years, starting when we bought it, as um, it grew and grew, that functioned like a large company. Whereas I don't know, maybe you wouldn't agree with this. It I always thought TSR functioned like a small company, right? It was a small fiefdom, to use D&D terms about it. Run by the lord of the manor, and it didn't always make business sense, but or it certainly didn't look at things from the way a company, uh, classically run company, would do. And Wizards more and more moved in that direction, and even more after the buyout from Hasbro.
Well, I mean that's true. I mean early early TSR, pre pre she who shall not be named, was very much a cult of personality,
Yeah,
whose personality depended on who was ascended at the time, but that was, I think, a legitimate description.
yeah,
And then there was the first buyout, and I always like to say it's really like any other classic corporate turnaround. It's the company is bought for a song. There's a little bit of money put into it, to prop up the brand and get it through its crisis, and then there's the cash out.
do you
That
think
worked.
that
It
was
worked for me, and it worked for this other person who shall not be named.
do you think that same thing was going on after the Wizards buyout?
No, I don't think so. I think Wizards was kind of built on the same sort of model that a tech company is built on, or a current tech company, a Silicon Valley company is built on. They're the same sort of, even the same sort of core values. I mean, the company the company's internal email had a core values group that everybody was supposed to read. You remember that?
Right.
Core values. In the big lounge with foosball tables and video games, and
Right.
the gym and all the other good stuff, sort of quality of life enhancements, as it were. The way that tech companies are, or the best tech companies are.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that during our era at Wizards, I'm not sure that if if you erased all the landmarks that you would be able to really tell that if we were at Wizards or at Google.
Yeah.
Just in terms of how people approach work, and cross fertilization between groups and that sort of thing. And Hasbro, very much, on the other hand, very much still locked into the 19th century manufacturing mindset.
Yeah, it was. I You know what? I don't want to say a step backwards, but it certainly was a step back to a more um, classical uh, perspective in the corporate office. All right. So after you, so we're coming up on an hour. So I've said this to a lot of other people. We'll go for about another 10, 15 minutes, and then maybe I can have you back on again, and we can talk about some other stuff too on a later episode. Um, so after Wizards, you're back out. What have you been doing in your post Wizards life?
Well, I mean, mostly I have been trying to take care of the property out here. We have we have the core of an old dairy farm that the owners essentially sold off in bits and pieces. So I'm in this extended bedroom community that you find all over the United States right now.
So you've
Uh,
become a gentleman farmer.
yes, that would be a way to look at it. We have an old barn. We have an old house. We think the foundations were laid around 1901. We're not entirely sure, but looking around mostly at things like the county records and um, some of the stuff that we find around the property, that's what we're thinking of. And then the place was built up, expanded room by room and floor by floor over the next many years. So we have about 13 acres.
Hmm,
So on a hillside in Driftless, Wisconsin. Do we
nice.
need to explain what Driftless, Wisconsin is?
You don't have to. We want to leave some mystery so people don't show up on your acreage.
There you
Uh,
go. Well, Driftless, you can look it up. You can look up the Driftless area. There's lots and lots of stuff published about the drift.
so, but you haven't left the world of gaming entirely.
No, I haven't. Have continued to do a little bit of freelancing. I did some with Tacticus Publishing, which is a small publisher. They mostly doing D&D fifth edition stuff uh, electronically, and the big one being GaryCon, of course,
Right, so you're
which is
involved in GaryCon, which is uh, a well, I mean, as cons go, a mid-sized con, but it's one of that's got a great reputation because it goes all the way back to Gary Gygax.
yeah, that's a fair assessment. Yeah, I mean GaryCon one was Gary's Wake.
Mm-hmm.
That's how Luke is counting them. So
Luke Gygax, Gary's son.
Gygax, yeah, Gary's Gary's youngest son by his first wife.
So you're involved. How are you involved with GaryCon now?
So my title is co-director of events. Um, what that means is two things. I am primarily responsible for beating people over the head until they submit events. Also, holding people's hands if they think something's going wrong. And one of the people who the volunteers are supposed to go to if Luke's not available.
And GaryCon is coming up later this month.
Very soon, yes.
It's still held. It's held in Lake Geneva. Yeah. Where is it
Correct.
held?
It's held at the Grand Geneva Resort, which um, was at one time the site of Gen Con one year at Gen Con 10, was still the Playboy Club at the time, but Gen Con 10 was held partially in the same facility. But right now it's the biggest venue in Lake Geneva, so that's where we are.
Um, and it GaryCon tends to sell out pretty quickly. How many folks do you get for the show?
Well, let me see. I could almost come up with a number here.
I, I, I'm willing to trust you. You can spitball it.
Well, the problem is I'm not entirely sure that my spitball wouldn't reflect the way things were a couple of months ago. So what I can tell you here is, hold on. No, that's not going to give it to me. I think we are somewhere in the vicinity of about 4,000
Wow.
if you count everybody.
Mm, I count everybody.
So count if you count all the badges that are issued. Let me go back. Counting all the GMs and all the attendees and all the exhibitors and etc. See if I'm giving you totals. Getting totals here. So the cheapest badge right now is the silver badge. And we have sold 2,200, almost 2,300 of those.
Whew.
Okay. But then there's a whole line of premium badges and a whole line of comp badges. And
Right. So
so,
Gary Con's going to be. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
so that silver badge number is very nearly doubled in terms of total number of people who are going to be on the site at any one time.
So Gary Con this year is sold out. Anyone who's watching this and wants to go, sorry, this year is no good. This year is full. It's
That's
not.
correct. There are people who are changing plans and are popping on our Facebook or Discord groups and saying, "Hey, I have a badge I want to sell." So you're not
All right.
completely hopeless. It's not completely hopeless, but it's going to take some effort.
Um, but there's always next year.
There's always
And
next.
also, are there any? Is there any online content for Gary Con?
There is. There's actually online badges are still available. So
Aha!
there is a virtual GaryCon, and you can attend online. Our ability to actually merge the two events is still we still haven't quite managed that. So there's essentially a companion convention that runs.
All right. Well, good to know. And so that's the website's GaryCon.com or
GaryCon.com will get it
GaryCon.
to you.
So if you're interested, check that out. For either this year for the online, or as Skip was saying, you may be able to find people who are selling their badges, or start looking for next year.
It's about,
Um,
well, I think we're still about, what, 10 days out or something like that. So there's still plenty of time for people to change their plans. So the
um,
first is the 21st. So that's
uh,
15 days out,
two
right?
2 weeks, 15 days, and several of the people who have been guests on the show will be there. A lot of the old TSR crew shows up to GaryCon. All right, so we're coming in here. I'm gonna stop drawing now. That's as far as I'm getting on the air. Not bad, looking all right. But Skip, we're at the 50th anniversary of D&D. That's what got this whole show started. And you've been, let's say, your first check was 1974. There's 49 years at least you've been involved in this. What are your thoughts on this incredible occasion, other than oh my God, we're old?
Well, there was at one time um, some doubt as to whether or not the industry or the hobby was going to continue. You remember the days of the Satanic Panic.
The
When
Satanic
there
Panic.
was.
I'm just sorry to ask you a question and then interrupt you. The Satanic Panic has come up in almost every episode, and I think that at some point I'm gonna need to make a point of encouraging a conversation because I think there's a lot of people who only have a vague idea of what we're talking about. But now is not the time for that. I'm sorry I interrupted you. Please continue, Skip.
Yeah, we should be in. I know somebody who actually made a documentary about it. So I will get in touch with me, and I will see if I can link you to a place where you can watch the documentary.
That would be terrific.
Um, yeah, there's a fellow in Tennessee who's been a preacher for some time, and he's gone back and taken a look at it. So the tale of it is D&D and the battle for the religious imagination, I believe, is the title, and it's
Hmm.
about a documentary.
That sounds good. I would want to.
In any case, there was this time when the future was in doubt. I mean, where there were swaths of the country where you could not buy the game,
Right.
right? Because no people were afraid. I know people who ran a comic shop in the Atlanta area, which is now the home of Dragon Con, who said, "Oh no, we're never going to carry D&D. I mean, somebody will burn out a storefront." But even at that point, people were saying, that not only is it going to flourish, but we've got all these new creative minds out there, who are going to be our next generation of artists and poets and writers. And that has turned out to be the case.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where you get things like Stranger Things and
Yeah. There's almost no one that's involved in uh, adventure movie making of any sort, even if it's not fantasy, that won't tell you that D&D was a big part of uh, their growing up. They're learning to be a creative person.
so yeah, and now D&D has never been bigger.
Yeah.
More D&D players, and there are more campaigns than there ever have been before. So there's going to be this creative legacy that's just going to continue to expand. I mean, it's a cultural phenomenon now.
So I don't I don't want to look 50 more years in the future because who the hell knows where that's going. But what do you think we've got is going to be the next few steps in the evolution or the growth of D&D?
Well, I mean, from where I'm sitting, there's a real question whether D&D is going to continue to be a paper, right, a physical product anymore, or whether people who own the IP are going to want to try to make it virtual or mainly virtual. So we know it's viable virtually because people were playing virtually during COVID.
Right.
Hasbro's got D&D Beyond, and so that I think that's a question, and I don't think anybody really knows the answer. Are there going to be D&D books in the future?
Right.
I can't tell you that there's going to. I'd like to think there will be. I like books.
Me too.
But um, whether you'll be able to buy D&D or whether you'll have to subscribe is that's an open question, and that'll be answered soon, I'm sure.
I think. I mean, yeah. The it seems clear to me that role playing as a hobby and the uh, the descendants of D&D and the very direct descendants of D&D will continue to be books, but will Dungeons and Dragons itself continue to be a physical product? It's an interesting question that I think you're the first person to bring up here, and I agree with you. The jury's out on that. It depends on the owners of the IP and how they want to how they think is best to make money.
Yeah, right. And who knows exactly what's going to happen. I mean, the big announcement that came in September, where they're talking about monetizing D&D, that was not pitched to D&D customers. That was pitched to Hasbro stockholders.
Right.
Um,
But I
so
mean, the other the big hullabaloo that happened with the OGL last fall, not getting into the depths of that, but the solution of that of releasing so much of D&D into Creative Commons means that the again the beating heart of it is out there for people to use and will remain something I think that is in physical format for a long time to come. But as you say, the question is, will it have the brand on it? Will it have the logo?
yeah, I certainly can't say what's going to
Yeah,
happen. I mean, a couple of years will tell us. I mean,
yeah,
and there's so many things that could affect that. Uh, you know, here
yeah.
in the United States, I mean, are we going to have policies that allow people to just continue to amass obscene amounts of wealth? Right.
We
That's what we're in right now. We're in.
yeah. Well, I don't think that we can fix capitalism.
We can't fix capitalism. We might be able to
We might be
fix
able to might be able to fix D&D though.
D&D. Well, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, when the top tax rate in the United States was what, 90%.
Yeah.
That wasn't that far away,
No,
and plenty of people got rich and
I agree
beat
with
communism
you, but I'm going to
and stuff.
stop this before we turn it into a
Yep.
political show.
Yes. Well, I make the point simply because there's so much going on in the background, and
Yeah,
what motivates people to make business decisions that they make really depends on a larger context.
right.
So,
All right. So, looking here, John Ryan says that the folks from Dragonlance Nexus are looking forward to Gary Con, and this on top of being the 50th anniversary of D&D is the 40th anniversary of Dragonlance,
that
which
is true, and that's actually closer. I mean, the Dragonlance came out in the spring, right?
yeah, yep. Margaret
Whereas D&D,
Weiss just posted that the DL1, I think the anniversary of the release of DL1 and the Test of the Twins short story is this month, or both this month.
yeah, right.
All right,
Whereas it,
so I'm going to say thank you, Skip. Hold on, I'm going to take you off air, and we can say our goodbyes after I do a little closing bit here. But I want to thank you very much for coming on, and I hope you'll at least consider coming back again for a show later in the series.
well, as I said before, you know where to find me.
Yeah. Oh, and in case other people don't, where did I put that? Oh, it's not there. Maybe I have to come to a different view. There we go. If you were looking to find Skip, you can find him on Facebook at skip.williams. So his username is skip.williams.395 on Facebook. That is the best place to find him. So again, thank you very much, Skip. I appreciate your time, and I'll be chatting with you in just a second. For everyone else, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming into the chat room. It's been a pleasure having you. As always, I'm enjoying this series very much. We're now going to move into the 1980s next week. I'm not sure what I'll be drawing there, but it'll be something from 1980. I'm going to finish up this drawing of the D&D of the DMG cover, and I'll be posting that. If you are looking at me online on my Facebook or Instagram or any of the other places, here we go. Instagram for me is instagram.com/Stannex, STANNEX. That image will show up sometime next week. However, if you happen to be a subscriber to the free newsletter for this show, 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com, you'll get the finished piece of art in your email later this week, probably Thursday or Friday. Today's Wednesday, probably Friday. But as soon as it's done, it will come to you. You will also, if you are a paying subscriber, get a process video showing the whole thing come together in 30 seconds to a minute for your entertainment. May just want to consider that. Anyway, 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com, free newsletter, and you can consider if you want to upgrade it to paid. But you get the heart of it at the free level. Anything else I want to say? I don't think so. I want to, again, thank you all for showing up. Thank you to the folks in chat, Dale and Linnea and Jeff and Kerry and Kevin, John Ryan too. Also, always good to see you all. I hope that those of you watching on replay, if you're free on a Wednesday night, can join us in the live chat. Also, being a subscriber, you can submit questions if you'd like them to for me to ask to the guests each week. Not a lot of people have taken advantage of that. I don't know why. Maybe because I'm asking such good questions myself. But don't trust me. If you have a good question, pass it along. I could use all the help I can get. So until next week, thank you very much again for joining us. I hope to see you then. Take care, everyone, and roll for initiative.